am upset about. It's like, hey man, your meal ticket is under constant attack. There's been dirty plays all season. Caitlin Clark was assaulted yesterday in her very first playoff game in the W.
Let's be crystal clear about something. When your league's biggest star, the player who single-handedly revived interest in your product, gets assaulted in her first playoff game and nobody does anything about it, you don't have a competitive balance issue, you have a protection crisis. And the WNBA just proved they were willing to sacrifice their golden goose on the altar of not appearing to play favorites. Many of you have been saying this for weeks. You watched Caitlin Clark get hammered, hip-checked, and targeted with dirty plays all season long, while the referees seemed to be playing a completely different game than the rest of us were watching. And now we're going to connect the dots on exactly how the league's failure to protect their most valuable asset didn't just hurt Clark. It exposed a fundamental flaw in how the WNBA operates. Because here's what nobody wants to admit out loud. The league was so terrified of being accused of favoritism toward their biggest star that they overcorrected in the opposite direction. They let veteran players test Clark physically in ways that would never fly in any other professional league. And in doing so, they didn't just fail Caitlin Clark, they failed every fan who showed up believing they were watching basketball, not a demolition derby. If you believe the story behind the story matters, if you think the league owes its fans honesty about what's really happening on the court, smash that like button. It tells us we're digging in the right direction. Let's filter out the noise and look at the numbers first, because the numbers don't lie. Before Caitlin Clark arrived, the Indiana Fever were pulling about 3,000 fans per game. That's not a professional sports atmosphere. That's a high school gym with better lighting. But once Clark suited up, suddenly 17,000 fans were packing arenas. That's not just growth. That's a 400% increase in attendance, home and away. The Fever led the entire league in attendance because people wanted to see what Clark would do next. And it wasn't just butts in seats. Her jersey outsold every player in WNBA history. We're talking about surpassing legends like Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird, players who built Hall of Fame careers over decades. Clark did it in one season. Her game against the New York Liberty drew 1.5 million viewers. That's better than some NBA games on TNT. The product wasn't just selling, it was exploding.
She struggled with physical defense she's faced at the professional level and voiced frustration with the league's officiating, recently telling reporters, quote, "I feel like I'm getting hammered and everybody is physical with me, and opponents get away with things that other people don't get away with." That's what Caitlin Clark. If Caitlin Clark is the quote-unquote savior, if she's the golden girl, milk it. Indiana Fever, all right, with Caitlin Clark, led the league in attendance both home and on the road. Fever averaged 17,000.
But here's where it gets complicated. Clark wasn't just succeeding, she was changing the entire conversation around women's basketball. Casual fans who never watched a WNBA game in their lives were suddenly tuning in. Families were buying tickets. Young girls were wearing her jersey. She became must-watch television in a league that had spent years struggling to maintain relevance in the broader sports conversation. And what did the league do with this gift? They let her get beaten up. Not just normal basketball contact. We're talking about targeted physicality that crossed the line from competitive defense into something much darker. Clark herself told reporters, "I feel like I'm getting hammered and everybody is physical with me." And opponents get away with things that other people don't get away with. Reading between the lines, that's not complaining. That's a star player telling you the officiating isn't consistent. She's telling you there's a different standard being applied. And you were onto something when you noticed that pattern throughout the season, because it wasn't subtle. The infamous eye poke incident should have been the wake-up call. A player swatted at the ball and somehow her hand came down with fingertips jabbing directly into Clark's eye. No foul called, no review for a flagrant. The refs just let everyone move on like it was normal basketball contact. If that had happened to LeBron James or Stephen Curry in an NBA game, the league would have issued a statement within hours and suspended someone. But in the WNBA, apparently your meal ticket getting poked in the eye mid-game doesn't even warrant a whistle. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Watch the tape from any Clark game and you'll see the pattern. Hip checks that sent her sprawling, forearm shivers that would make an NFL linebacker proud, defenders bodying her off the ball in ways that simply aren't called fouls. The physicality wasn't just intense, it was personal.
Yeah, but she needs to be on a better team. She's on the wrong team. She's got the wrong skill set to handle the physicality of that league. And she's a...
So let's talk about what ESPN and other media outlets conveniently ignored while this was happening. They had a once-in-a-generation talent bringing unprecedented attention to their broadcasts. But instead of protecting that investment, they gave her mediocre coverage. They treated her like just another player instead of recognizing what she actually represented. The difference between the WNBA being a niche product and being genuinely mainstream. Clark's teammates weren't helping either. In that playoff loss to Connecticut, she dropped 29 points, dished out 10 assists, and grabbed 7 rebounds. She was doing everything, and her teammates missing open shots, running plays that looked like they'd never practiced them, making fundamental mistakes that wouldn't fly in a college program. Clark was carrying the offensive load while simultaneously trying to survive the physical onslaught. The psychological toll of that situation is hard to quantify. You're the face of the franchise. You're putting up historic numbers. You're bringing more attention to the league than it's seen in years. And your reward is getting battered on every possession while your teammates struggle to execute, and the refs pretend they don't see what's happening. Connecting the dots reveals something uncomfortable. The WNBA positioned itself as the league of opportunity and equality all season long. They promoted their inclusive culture and progressive values. But when it was time to protect their most valuable asset, the player who made them relevant to millions of new fans, they completely abandoned her. They let the narrative around competitive balance override basic player safety. And here's the thing that should terrify everyone involved with the league. Those new fans who showed up because of Clark, they didn't sign up to watch their favorite player get beaten up while the officials looked the other way. They expected professional basketball with professional officiating standards. Instead, they got something that looked more like a vendetta being carried out in plain sight. The question you're probably asking right now is, how did it get this bad? How does a league sacrifice its biggest star so publicly? Drop a comment below with your theory, because the official explanations we're getting don't add up. Let's hear what you think is really driving these decisions. We're getting into territory where the breadcrumbs lead to some uncomfortable conclusions, but multiple sources close to the situation suggest there was institutional resistance to Clark's dominance from day one. Not from all players, but from enough voices that it created an environment where targeting her physically became almost normalized. Some veteran players made it clear they resented the attention Clark was receiving. They'd spent years grinding in a league that barely got coverage, and suddenly this rookie shows up and gets more media attention in 1 week than they'd received in their entire careers. That resentment manifested on the court in ways the league should have anticipated and prevented. Alyssa Thomas made comments about racial prejudice in the fandom, trying to frame Clark's popularity through that lens. She told reporters she'd never experienced racial comments like those from Indiana Fever fans during her 11-year career, and instead of focusing on Clark's jaw-dropping talent and historic statistical output, ESPN ran with that narrative. They took a story about an athlete breaking records and turned it into a racial controversy. Let's be clear about what happened there. Thomas has 14,000 followers on social media. Most casual sports fans had never heard of her before this controversy. The only reason she became part of the national conversation was because of Caitlin Clark. And rather than celebrating what Clark was accomplishing, rather than examining why one player could generate that much interest, the media machine decided to make it about everything except basketball. Clark stood her ground, insisting her success came from perseverance and hard work. But the fact that she even had to defend her accomplishments in those terms shows how twisted the narrative became. She shouldn't have been explaining why she deserved recognition. She should have been getting protected by the league that was cashing the checks her popularity wrote. The WNBA had built its entire brand around being different from other leagues, more inclusive, more progressive, more focused on the collective rather than individual stars. That's fine in theory, but in practice, when you have a generational talent who's bringing unprecedented revenue and attention to your product, you have a responsibility to protect that player. Instead, the league's response to Clark getting physically targeted was essentially, figure it out yourself. They acted like consistent officiating would somehow be showing favoritism. They convinced themselves that letting veterans rough her up was maintaining competitive integrity. What they actually did was demonstrate they had no idea how to handle success.
Truth is finally coming to the light. The same light that is going to be dimming here in about 12 hours when Caitlin Clark is eliminated from the playoff.
And here's where the failure becomes catastrophic. That playoff game against Connecticut, the one where Clark put up 29 points while her team fell apart around her, should have been a showcase moment. First playoff appearance for a rookie who'd revolutionized interest in the league. Instead, it became a symbol of everything wrong with how the WNBA operates. Fans who'd never watched women's basketball before tuned in, expecting to see why everyone was talking about Caitlin Clark. What they saw was a player getting mauled on every possession while officials swallowed their whistles. They saw teammates who couldn't execute basic plays. They saw a league that appeared to have no idea how to feature its biggest star. Social media was lighting up with theories about why the officiating was so inconsistent. Some fans were connecting dots about veteran players being allowed to play more physically. Others were pointing out the contrast between how Clark was officiated versus how other stars in the league were treated. The WNBA community was buzzing about whether this was incompetence or something more deliberate. What's undeniable is the impact on fan trust. Those 17,000 people showing up to Fever games weren't just there for entertainment. They were investing in a product. When they watched their investment get beaten up while the league did nothing, that trust evaporated. You can't rebuild that easily. The merchandise sales tell the same story. Clark's jersey wasn't just outselling current players, it was outselling legends. That means fans weren't just buying into a moment. They were buying into what they thought would be a long-term star they could follow for years. Now, many of those fans are questioning whether the WNBA deserves their continued support. ESPN's coverage throughout this disaster has been pathetic. They had a ratings goldmine. Clark's games were delivering viewership numbers that exceeded some NBA broadcasts. But instead of building storylines around her talent and the historic season she was having, they kept pivoting to controversy and racial narratives that had nothing to do with basketball. Not officially confirmed, but sources suggest ESPN was walking a tightrope. They wanted the ratings Clark delivered, but they were also trying not to alienate the existing WNBA establishment. That meant giving Clark coverage while simultaneously platforming voices that were critical of her success. The result was coverage that satisfied nobody and made ESPN look like they had no coherent strategy. If these reports are accurate, the network was so concerned about being accused of overhyping Clark that they underserved the story. They had a generational talent transforming their product, and they treated it like a controversy to manage rather than a success to celebrate. The league's promotion of itself as a space for opportunity and equality rings hollow now. When opportunity arrived in the form of unprecedented fan interest and revenue, they couldn't handle it. When equality meant protecting all players the same way, including their biggest star, they failed. The values they promoted in press releases disappeared when tested by reality. Here's the bottom line. The WNBA had a chance to build something truly special around Caitlin Clark. They had a player who could have been the face of the league for the next decade. someone who could have elevated everyone's profile and earning potential. Instead, they let her get targeted physically, failed to protect her, and watched as the goodwill she'd generated evaporated. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on Stess, because we're going to be tracking how the league responds to this disaster. The WNBA just lost more than a playoff series. They lost credibility with millions of fans who gave them a chance. And we'll be here documenting every attempt to spin this into something it wasn't. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss what happens next. Caitlin Clark deserved better than what the WNBA gave her this season. The fans who showed up deserved better, and the league better figure out fast how to fix this. Because once-in-a-generation talents don't come around often. When they do, you protect them, you celebrate them. You don't sacrifice them to appease people who resent their success. This is about more than basketball. It's about whether the WNBA can actually handle being successful. Right now, the answer looks like no.